Hey, everybody. Welcome to the GMI Rocket Show. I'm your host, Roman Zelichenko, former immigration attorney turned entrepreneur. I am the co founder and CEO of Laborless, an immigration tech platform that automates H-1B and PERM compliance, and also the founder of GMI Rocket, which is a digital marketing agency focused on the immigration and global mobility industry. Today is episode number 149. Our guest today is who's from all over the world, but is joining us from the UK, is Nisan Yesildaglar, who is the CEO of Imminova, which is an AI and immigration tech agent consultancy based in the UK that does inbound UK immigration, particularly for business and work visas and things like that. It is like a tech platform and a legal service all wrapped in one. And so I'm excited to talk to Nisan about, her life and career as an attorney, as an immigration attorney, then working for the government, having moved around the world as well a bunch of times, and sort of how all of that culminated into building Imminova, which, I talk about this a lot. I'm based in the US. There are a lot of US companies. I mean, by far the most from the US, but there are an increasing number of firms and companies focusing on immigration tech around the world. So I'm very excited to always bring on guests if I can to showcase immigration tech from outside of America. Okay, before we jump into the episode, I do want to give a quick thank you and a big thank you to the main sponsor of this episode, 8 a.m. DocketWise. So for any immigration lawyers or in-house folks or paralegals or anybody who's listening, DocketWise is an end-to-end immigration case management platform focused on U.S. immigration that has best-in-class immigration forms. In fact, some people, I guess I should say, use it just for forms, even if they have other case management platforms. Of course, DocketWise does all of it. They have customizable questionnaires to send to clients in a number of different languages, industry-leading integrations between DocketWise and lots of other companies, including my company, Laborless. They have great customer service. One of the things I really like about DocketWise is that they create a lot of content for the immigration industry. So they have a free ebook, they have blogs on their website, they have a podcast that has a lot of information about immigration for practitioners. So if you're in the immigration industry and you're interested in learning a little bit more about DocketWise, do check them out. The website is 8am, so the number 8am.com/DocketWise, or use the link in the show notes. So thank you to DocketWise for your support. All right, with that, Nisan, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it, and I'm super excited to have this conversation with you.
Same here, Roman. Yeah, it's great to be on. Thanks for having me.
And you're in London. Actually, my guest last week was in London, and my guest 2 weeks ago was in Switzerland. So I've had this like European resurgence. Yeah. Okay, so you have a really interesting background. Obviously, I always like to kind of talk about the guest kind of life and their early life a little bit before we jump into, of course, what your business does today and the immigration tech, all that good stuff. So you have a Turkish name, you live in London, but you speak fluent French.
Yes.
Right, and of course English and other stuff. So tell me a little bit about that. So what's the story with how your life is kind of so global? You were born in Turkey, right, as a young girl?
Exactly.
And then,
I was born in Turkey in Ankara, so the capital. But very quickly, immigration just started becoming part of my life. At 1 year old, we moved to Belgium, so Brussels, where my mom was posted off on a diplomatic mission. So she worked for the Turkish government, and she was there to, she was going to be based there for 4 years, and along we went. And so I guess my sort of very early childhood, not that I would remember anything before too, but was sort of very much in Brussels, in this kind of foreign place that I didn't really that I didn't know, that my parents didn't know, or that we didn't really have any ties to apart from work. So that's sort of how it got started, and that's, I guess, my sort of first experience of nursery or school. And we went to just the local school. and that, I guess Belgium being a bilingual place, we actually started off with a Flemish school, which is, I guess what they speak in Belgium, sort of close to Dutch. Um, and kind of also by accident, I suppose, picked up French, just the sort of the wonders of being in like a bilingual country. Um, I have to say it was sort of interesting because we would sort of just obviously be fluent in those languages and then come home to, only Turkish speaking
Mhm.
parents, which was quite a sort of weird experience. But it was quite kind of fun because it just felt like a secret code that they couldn't understand. But so yeah, that's sort of very much the sort of very early years. And
How long, by the way, were you there? I mean,
yeah, so it was until we came back. So the post officially finished in 2000. So stayed there until I was 6.
okay.
So yeah, so it was just the kind of very early life. And as I say, we were just there as a kind of small family unit, but we'd have my grandparents come out,
Mm,
and with that still, I guess, keeping on the
mm.
Turkish identity in a foreign place. So yeah.
That's so interesting. I've met over the years a number of people who have had parents who were either diplomats or in some cases had these interesting corporate roles where every three,
Mm,
4, 5 years they would go to a different region and around the world, with a really
yeah.
big organization and open up a new office or like launch a
Mm,
project. And a lot of times, I don't know how it is with diplomats, but a lot of times I know folks go to sort of international schools because
yeah.
I'll talk to them and I hear their story and I think to myself, your accent, I mean, you don't really have an accent,
Right.
and sort of, I can't tell where you're from. And it's because a lot of these international schools, I mean, of course, assuming English is the main language, there's sort of a conglomerate of people from all over, and the
Mm,
teachers tend to have some super neutral kind of English. But
yeah.
you learned, I mean, Turkish at home, you learned French and Dutch as well in
Mm.
school. Do you speak Dutch as well?
So unfortunately, I forgot most of it. I think it's really
Okay.
weird to look back at videos of speaking this language fluently, and just
Yeah.
thinking, is that was that me?
Yeah.
But I still kind of understand it a little bit. But no, we've just sort of turned the focus back onto French. And I guess that's what happened when, to your point, you just always in these places for such a limited amount of time.
Mhm.
It does make more sense in hindsight to be just sent off to international school so you can have this continuity of education wherever you go next. But no, I think my parents chose the kind of local, maybe
Yeah.
more authentic route. Um, so when we came back to Turkey eventually, there was definitely a decision to be made. Okay, do we send them to an international school? Do we send them to a Turkish school? What do we do? And in the midst of decision paralysis, they decided, okay, we're just going to send them to both. And
Mm.
so what happened is we would go to the French school in the morning from stupid o'clock like 7 a.m. until 2, and then 3 p.m. until 8 we'd go to the Turkish school.
Wow.
And that went on for I think longer than it felt sustainable. And it was just like a really, once again, just really interesting. You would go to, the French lycée in the morning, very, very kind of laid back, no uniforms. And then grandparents come and pick you up, change you behind a bus stop, into your uniforms, and then off you go across town to the Turkish school. It was
Wow.
definitely really strange, I think, and didn't really make any sense to anyone. So it was always kind of a bit difficult to, I guess, find identity, but also connect with people in a way that resonated with their lives. So yeah,
Did,
definitely
did you
sort of.
have did you have homework from both schools?
Oh
Oh
yeah,
my
oh
gosh.
yeah.
You
I mean, it
poor
was
thing.
just.
And you had no time to do it at night. I mean,
No, no.
wow.
I think I remember, I mean, obviously we're quite, still quite young, and just really naive. And at one point I just thought that the sun had stopped rising. And I just remember asking, I was like, does the sun ever come out? Just because it's always dark by the time we're leaving or we're coming back. So yeah, it was definitely interesting. I think early on it helped us, have a lot of accountability because we had to make a decision, say, no, actually, we prefer one or the other.
Mhm.
So, and then, I think for not so quite deep reasons, just because they didn't have a uniform, we chose the French school,
The French school.
and that was it. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. So you continue to grow up in Turkey, and did your family do any more posts after that? I mean, as you were kind of a
Yeah.
kid,
It,
teenager.
yeah. So, I mean, the post continued. My mum was based in sort of various capital cities after that. She was in sort of Stockholm, she was in The Hague. We couldn't sort of follow her every time.
Mm,
But the last post, so after coming back from Brussels, we stayed in Ankara for another 4 years. And then we joined her in London.
mhm,
And that ultimately became her last mission. So we went there in 2005. um, I guess we were very lucky that the school was called Lycée Français Charles de Gaulle, and there is one in every major capital city. And so, and they were so synced together that we would really just close, I guess, close the textbook in Ankara, and the next, when we moved to London, you pick it up from the next page. I mean, it was that kind of synchronized. So I really didn't sort of struggle too much there. But
mm,
I guess, it's still that really weird feeling of being kind of a foreigner in already a foreign place. You're in a French school being Turkish in the UK.
mm,
So it just kind of felt like, a bubble within a bubble. And it was interesting because, although the French education is actually incredible, they don't necessarily prioritize English. So I didn't
mhm.
actually learn English until I was maybe about 14 or 15, I would say.
Oh, wow.
Just because obviously for them, the French language is really important to sort of protect
Sure.
that heritage. It doesn't really matter if you kind of get your English to a certain level or not. Most people after the French school end up going back to France. So
Mhm.
that was the kind of the extent of it. But no, we had to make like a very active kind of active efforts to improve our English, just because obviously we're in the UK and it would be good to have a conversation with the kind of people around us. So yeah, so that's sort of how it evolved, and we stayed in the UK thereafter. Yeah, even after our mission.
As a, I mean, it sounds like you had at least for some time, quite a lot of schooling as a, as a young girl. Do you find that you were more kind of studious, where you were kind of in the books and thinking about, yeah, good grades and things like that, or were you a little bit more maybe entrepreneurial, if you will? I don't know, selling
Mm,
things, or I don't know, hustling things, whatever that is, or I don't know, a
yeah.
combination of both. I'm always curious to see, if
Mm,
maybe your parents have shared stories, or you remember,
yeah.
like, what did you have some sort of tendencies when you were younger, whether or not you still
Yeah.
do that today?
Yeah, that's such a good question. I was definitely a very serious child, I would say. I did have sort of my head in books. My dad is a gynecologist and sort of a doctor. My mom being a diplomat, I think it was just very important to be always very like studious and very serious. But actually, I would also had a more maybe hindsight is a great thing. You can just call it entrepreneurial, I guess. I would just make a lot of things and sell them.
Mm,
I would just like make things out of paper. And I didn't really concern with myself with selling these cheaply either. I would just really, I guess, rate what I would do and sell it to whatever family, friends, and just make them feel like they had to buy it because I was a child and I just made all these things. So
yeah.
it was quite fun. I would sort of and I really, I guess, enjoyed that side of having my money. I would actually have a lot of my own kind of pocket money from a young age. When we moved to London, alongside school, I would also do a lot of babysitting and just kind of going around, and I don't know, I mean, a couple of times a week maybe. And at that age, I don't think you necessarily need money, but it was just
Mhm.
that sort of, it was just quite fun to earn money and just
Yeah.
sort of do something that was helpful, and you just felt like you've earned it.
Yeah, and independence as a kid. I mean, you don't have to,
Exactly.
if you want to buy some extra candy or crisps or
Yeah.
something,
Right.
you don't need to ask anybody. You don't need
Yeah.
to show them the nutrition label and say, no, no, please give me, I swear to God, I'm not buying junk. You can buy all the junk you want.
100%.
That's super cool. So at that point, you're living in, in London. You obviously are finishing high school and you're kind of thinking about, the rest of your life, I guess, remains there. But you kind of went to school you went to the UK, you went to school in the UK, right? And you became you studied to be a lawyer. Is this something that you were studious, but you also were a little bit of a hustler, right? I mean, did you think about law as a career you wanted to take? And I say this also understanding that, in America, and I guess in Canada as well, and maybe in a few other countries, I'm not sure off the top of my head where, law school is a doctorate. You have to go to undergraduate and then you get your, doctor, or at least a master's of law. In the UK and many other places around the world, law degree is a bachelor's degree. It is your, it's your second post-secondary education.
Yeah.
And did you want to pursue law as really a career, or was it just, okay, well, I have to get a bachelor's and I don't know, I like to read and whatever, and just become kind of a lawyer?
Yeah. I mean, I guess I was surrounded by a lot of lawyers growing up. And I quite liked them and how they presented and, how they spoke. And so I think there was definitely that aspiration side of it. But maybe more importantly, when we were in Brussels, obviously I had that kind of firsthand immigration experience from like a personal point of view. But my mom actually during that time, during that post, she was working on a piece of sort of an not an EU-Turkey treaty that gave Turkish citizens, special rights in EU countries. And I remember her just really going through, the kind of the law and how it was sort of set up, how it affects you, I guess the various sort of, how it could be applied. And I just thought that was really fascinating. And I've just kind of seen her through this, the legal battles, at sort of very high courts, at one point the kind of European Court of Human Rights, and just kind of really making that argument, making that case. And I knew that I found that really fascinating in terms of, it's one thing to look at a piece of law, but then how that gets applied, how that gets interpreted, was definitely something that I think, kind of making a case and making that argument was something that was really, I think at 18, to be really honest, did I really know like, oh, I want to be a lawyer and like burning with desire? No.
Yeah.
But, I thought like, this is probably I'm probably always going to be something that is not too far from this, it will just give me that kind of critical thinking, or just like, I do enjoy like, reading quite a bit. So I could probably find my way, even if this is not it, I can kind of fine tune my way out, which is ironic because I stayed with it, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, listen, it's also just a great education as a business owner, which I'm sure you know now, even though you're in the business of law. And I argue that you guys are lucky, in the UK system, where you can get your bachelor's of law and not have to spend time getting any degree and then going to be a lawyer afterwards. It's like, what's the point? So I think it's a great, what, if I knew I wanted to be a lawyer and I would go and I could have the chance to go back in time, I would probably get a bachelor's of law somewhere else, and then come back to the US and get a master's of law, which is a 1-year program, and be able to practice 3 years, 2 to 3 years ahead of all of my peers of the same age.
Right.
If I was trying to optimize for time to be a lawyer as quickly as possible, you know what I mean? But so I think it's a really cool system. Okay, so you graduated from University of Exeter. I know you did that. I guess at the same time, or was this sort of afterwards? You also got 1 master's or 2 master's degrees. I mean, you continued to study. I guess you had maybe some nostalgia for going to school in the morning and in the evening. So you decided, why not continue? Right?
Exactly. That's all I know.
But you did. I mean, you got your master's of law, right from
exactly.
where you continued that education.
So, well, I did a bachelor's in law and French law. So the one in the UK was sort of 3 years, and then we went to France for a year, Rennes, in Brittany, for 1 year to do the kind of French law masters.
Mhm.
And, you know, I mean, it was definitely a sort of shock to the system. I mean, first of all, to go from, French education to UK educational system, which have sort of nothing to do with each other. But then, after 3 years of just getting used to that, to go back into the French system was just sort of going into these, kind of cold plunges without end. So, and then that was sort of 1 year. I would probably still say that it was the toughest year of my life. And that I think just comes with the nature of, French education. It really is about sort of getting up, at 7 and then having school or whatever, like classes until 6, and then having, whatever 6-hour exams on the weekends and just sort of that, rinse and repeat. Um, which is fine. But then I guess you add that layer of it's a really tough schooling system. So, in the UK, I mean, I was so surprised when I went to in my first year of university, getting sort of distinctions and people saying it's great work. And I was sort of like, what do you mean? I really sort of it feels really unsettling because,
Mhm.
it's in the French system is more sort of the other way around, sort of like you did fine,
Mhm.
this is okay.
Mhm.
And so yeah, so just after getting used to kind of just all that glory, going back into a really harsh environment was
Right.
definitely took some getting used to.
That's so interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, it makes me think about. I mean, honestly, when like my sibling went to a really difficult high school in New
Oh
York, like
yeah.
one of the top high schools, and it's a science high school, and it's just studying,
Wow.
day and night, and then you have a ton of homework, and
Mm.
and it's very competitive. So if you have an A minus, you feel like a failure because everyone around you
Right.
is trying to get that A. And I think
Exactly.
that has its downsides as well, especially when you're,
Sure.
a teenager, like coming
Mm.
into your own.
Yeah.
But going from that and entering university, even if it's even a good school, almost always it is going to be way less work. And so you've now developed this sense of this work ethic and this sort of tolerance for kind of mental,
Mm.
I don't know, stimulus, if you
Resilience.
will.
Yeah.
Yeah, resilience. And then you can ace university, and I
Yeah.
realized that because I was the other way around. I went
Uh-huh.
to a high school and I did well in high school, but it was like
Mm.
our local high school here and it was fine, but I mean, not even close to the rigor. And when I
Right.
went to university, I was like, okay, well, I'm going to continue to do the same thing and do well. It's not that I didn't
Mm.
want to study. I just
Yeah.
realized only a year after that I didn't know actually how to study. So in a
Hmm.
way, it's sort of your balance,
Yeah.
your trade offs there.
Yeah.
But so you graduated from law. You obviously have a master's, and you did you started to work in the legal industry. I'm not gonna we can surely go and pull sort of lessons from every position, but I wanted to
Yeah.
talk about a couple of things. I mean, number one, you
Mhm.
did work at an immigration firm in the UK for a number of years, and that was sort of
Yeah.
your I guess I don't know introduction into immigration
Yeah.
law, I suppose, if you will. And that was that corporate immigration that you did?
Exactly. So it was corporate business immigration.
Mhm.
And as you say, it was just sort of like my foot through the door into the whole immigration land. Yeah, and that was sort of, but I guess, yeah, that kind of private practice, right? So it's sort of the law firm side of things, dealing mainly with companies and their immigration needs. So say you're a company, and you've got a role and you can't fill it from the local talent pool, or you've identified someone, say from the US, and you want to bring them over on a work visa. You would first help the company get their sponsor license, and then get that person their visa that is attached to that license. So that's sort of roughly how it works in the UK.
Yeah, it makes sense. Quite similar in the
Yeah,
US and probably in most countries. So you had that experience doing that side, and then what I want to also talk about a little bit is you then also worked in the government,
yeah,
right, for Department of I guess Health
yeah.
in the UK, and there, I mean, at least according to your LinkedIn profile, you were
Mm.
kind of a policy advisor, but there was was there an immigration aspect to it, or was there anything where you leveraged your knowledge and experience as an immigration lawyer to kind of impact or do whatever work you did from a policy standpoint?
Yeah, that's interesting. I suppose, I mean, I guess leveraging it in the capacity of so working. Also, when I was working at the government, it was during COVID, and
Mm,
being the Department of Health, there was a lot of pumping out policies around COVID and so on. But one thing that became very stark realization during that time is the shortage of care workers in the UK, and that there was a real crisis, especially for, I don't know, elderly homes or elderly people that had, for example, contracted COVID, and, the various restrictions that made it impossible for them to get care. So we always had that in kind of putting together policy that would kind of help, sort of plug that gap. So I guess the workforce issue was very, very front of mind, and so immigration very much played a role in that. And actually, very shortly after, it was sort of a policy move that sort of led to the introduction of what we now call the health and care visa, which is something that didn't exist before, because it just became very clear that the UK, the local talent pool, or sort of the residents in the UK just couldn't basically provide that, the level or the numbers of care staff that was needed, and probably is going to be needed even more in the future as the UK continues to age.
Yeah, I mean, we have the same issue in the US. There are a variety of visa options for healthcare workers and home health aides, type of situation. Because sure, you can have obviously nurses and doctors, especially in rural areas, but also caretakers for the elderly, caretakers for the sick. There are a lot of different, little options for those folks. So I think it's a tremendous, there's a tremendous need, and it's great to have policy be flexible, I think, around that.
Yeah, definitely. And I would sort of speak quite highly of, the UK government. I think, when it comes to all government jobs, I think, what you hear a lot is like, bureaucracy and so on, and those things are all maybe true. But actually, within government, at least, there was definitely a lot of discussions that kind of led to actual change, and what felt like quite a sort of stressful time. Definitely a lot of things, maybe were wrong and not quite right. But yeah, to your point, I think that it's important to kind of keep reviewing what's working, what's not, and just making those changes, so that you can kind of get the most of it.
So before you started your own business, lastly, I mean, it seems like you worked in the government, and then you went and worked at an organization called Law Business Research, which is, I guess, a tech company, or a tech service. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I suspect that that's sort of where your transition, because at this point you've got private practice experience, you now have government experience where you know how policies are made. But how do you take the leap from that to a technology company? I mean, for me, I worked as a lawyer before I started Laborless. I worked at a tech company, and I sort of saw how it worked on the inside, and it gave me a little bit more confidence to say, all right. I mean, I was working at a much larger a quite large organization. It's not that I was looking to build something that big, but still to see the inner workings is helpful. So can you share a little bit about that role and sort of, I don't know, how that shifted maybe your thoughts about your own career?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, so what's interesting is after the government, and maybe this was sort of fueled a little bit about, a little bit about the things that I spoke about in terms of, it is quite slow, bureaucratic, and so on. I did sort of try the startup scene before actually sort of joining LBR, and that was kind of, it was such a sort of being thrown in the deep end. I think startups, you're just wearing like all sorts of hats. There's nowhere to kind of hide. So it was just incredible. I think you learn so much just in sort of a month of being there versus like years that you might spend elsewhere. Actually, my latest role, that was based in New York. So we'd moved to New York, and I was looking into I guess they have more of a sort of tech side now, but really what they are is sort of a legal market research. So they're really sort of looking to understand like the legal market, whether it's in specific areas of law, and just kind of producing these reports to kind of help practitioners, but also help consumers, just to guide them in terms of like who's maybe the best lawyer or who to go to for this and what the market looks like and so on. So that was quite an interesting role. It actually gave me a lot of exposure to speak directly with a lot of practitioners from all over the world. So we would, for example, I would work on like a report on immigration, for instance, and you'd be speaking with practitioners all over, conducting interviews. I mean, I definitely went overboard and I would sort of speak to as many as possible. That wasn't maybe sort of required so much, but I think it's just so fascinating just to understand the market. And I think one thing that really hit home was that, okay, immigration is as fragmented as I thought, and it's everywhere like that. So it just didn't really paint like this uniform picture of like, okay, these guys really have got a hang on it compared to another market. And I think that definitely that experience just kind of gave me the confidence of saying, right, you could definitely, because I've had this idea of, building out my own thing for many, many years. And maybe I just never really had the confidence. Um, but also I just didn't really know if there was really a need for it. You're looking around and, there will be tons of immigration lawyers. So it's kind of like, what's your edge? So that experience combined with, really AI starting to make a noise, I just thought, well, okay, it's just now or never. So I just thought, yeah, that's basically how it kind of all came to fruition.
It's interesting because when I reflect on my kind of story, I had this idea where I felt that it was fragmented. I wasn't really sure. I
Mm,
had to spend my own time doing the market research, but my work experience at the tech company gave me a little bit of an insight into how a tech company should run, how it
right.
should be structured. You kind of had a little bit of the opposite situation where your
Mm,
job you were doing market research as part of your work
yeah,
effectively. So
yeah,
you had to figure out some other stuff on your own, but you got paid to do the market research stuff, and then you saw through your work how fragmented it actually was. That's it's so interesting to see kind of how different people's paths go.
yeah,
And so
exactly.
I guess at that point you realized, because then you eventually when you did leave, you went back to found Imminova,
Mm.
which would be you going back into private practice effectively for yourself.
Exactly, exactly. So that's sort of, I think after that I was quite actually I just wanted to give it a go. I think I've just
Mhm.
basically bored everyone I know to death about my idea. And I think they were all just kind of like, just do it because we
Yeah.
can't take it anymore.
Stop telling us about it already.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly, exactly. So they're just like, just please go and do something.
Yeah.
So yeah, so that's how it started. And I mean, the reality is I knew that if I if I got the idea or the distribution or the product right, I knew that I could, selling it is probably the wrong word. I just knew that I love talking to clients. I just love finding out what is it? Like what do you see? What is, and I think just that question, and I think that's why I really enjoyed my last role. It's just like that was my job. I just had to interview practitioners and just kind of really ask or just really listen to what they were saying and just really ask questions that now actually help me in how I think about things. So yeah, that's the, it was sort of July 2024, and that's it. I was just like, that's it's starting, and it started with just the usual admin. There's not, absolutely nothing kind of appealing about. I think that the first steps that you take when you set up a business, but it felt really sort of exhilarating, and it just felt like, okay, now I feel like I'm in the right path. So yeah, so that was really, I think, a game changer.
I love it. All right, I want to dive into Imminova. Before we do, I just want to
Mm,
take a very quick pause. I do want to say thank you to the second sponsor of the show, Lex Reception. So for any immigration lawyers or other lawyers listening in the U.S. and honestly around the world, Lex Reception is a legal intake, reception, and client support service that provides answering phone call services, and they answer messages in real time. So it's not a bot necessarily. They schedule appointments, and they basically provide law firm clients with 24/7 legal answering specialists. So especially for small and mid-sized firms that don't just have a team of kind of answering or a receptionist rather answering the phones, or you don't want to overwhelm your paralegals and attorneys with answering client inquiries, especially basic ones. Lex Reception does that for you. So they also proactively reach out to people who maybe filled out a form on your page or, otherwise expressed interest so that they can kind of help you do sales. So both customer service and customer support for existing clients, and also doing some outbound sales for prospective clients. And of course, the idea is that there are a million different reception services, but the idea of Lex Reception is that they have specific industry expertise around immigration law and law more generally, so that you don't have to kind of train up receptionists to, who don't know anything. So Lex Reception integrates with a number of tech platforms that law firms typically use: Clio, Practice Panther, LawPay, and many others. So for any lawyers or law firm folks who are listening, check them out. There is a link. You can check them out at lexreception.com, but there is a link in the show notes that gives you $250 off your first month of service. So if anyone's interested, please follow that link and check it out, and tell them that you heard about them from the GMI Rocket show. Okay. Thank you, Lex Reception. All right. Nisan, so you've had this whole experience and you realized you want to give it a go. You're just annoying your friends and family and everybody with your idea. And like you said, you kind of have to get it started. Tell me, what is Imminova? And I guess, how did it start? But sort of, what is it? Because it's both a tech platform and a law service, right? A law firm, basically. Yeah. So how does it work? Sort of, what does it do? What is Imminova?
Yeah. The initial idea was quite simple. It was just sort of, helping companies hire international talent. It was just sort of that. And then everything else just kind of, built on that foundation. And the tech side, really started to develop, and we basically turned into, to your point, like an AI native firm that would, help companies get that talent in much faster, and it's sort of easier process. And obviously, because we use automation, it would be significantly cheaper than the alternative being sort of traditional law firms. And so, I suppose, it's a bit of a hybrid, because I think when we talk about, legal tech, or, whether it's sort of insurance tech, I think the more traditional way of thinking about tech until a couple of years ago was to think, okay, you've got a product and then you're going to sell that product, whether you're selling to the actual experts or you're selling to the consumer. And that's very much how we set out. During my time in the city law firm, I was actually very lucky to be sort of put in charge to develop the immigration compliance side of the business. And as part of that, created, was able to sort of, think about how we actually productize this and how we sell it. And so the idea was to do the same and start with immigration compliance and, sell it as a product, as a SaaS, a SaaS product. But actually very quickly realized, like maybe the world is also changing in terms of what the customer is asking for. They would say, I think people are just not really that interested in how you do things anymore. Like, they don't necessarily want to see another platform, or like how you do the work much easier or much faster. They're not sort of so worried for you to actually prove that you can do the three things, like, being fast, easy, and cheap. They just want to have the outcome. It's like, if you deliver, then it just means that it's working, and we don't actually really mind how you get that done. So I guess you definitely have this shift from, okay, we just want a product, to we want a service, and we want a service that is just enabled with AI, whatever you do, to really get something that is, trustworthy, because it is law at the end of the day, right? People, I think, are still not ready for like a self-service that is that's kind of that's trustworthy, that is accurate, that they can actually still get really good outcomes, and that it sort of benefits them in other ways, like because it's more cost effective and so on.
So can you tell me a little bit about your, I guess, target client? Because I know you came from the corporate immigration space. On the Imminova website, it talks about work permits and things like that. So who do you help? Who do you serve? Who should be let's say, exploring your website, or thinking
Right.
about maybe using a tool like this, or I guess a service like this
Mm.
that's automated but still kind of, I guess, human centered, right? Because you're still involved as the human
Exactly.
attorney. So yeah, who's that kind of target client of yours?
Yeah. So, I mean, at first it was sort of so sector agnostic, right? Because
Mm,
it's just immigration could be any sector, could be companies of any sizes. I think in the UK, because immigration is so, well, one, expensive, and two, complicated, it really is just bigger companies that go after like the international talent. And this is exactly why I guess I started, and I thought, okay, looking at the numbers, only 3% of UK companies have a sponsor license, i.e. the ability to, hire international talent. And, being able to hire international talent just puts you in the driver's seats in terms of, competing for that talent, which is, we're very much in a talent war right now. So it just kind of felt crazy that most businesses were not kind of having those advantages. So the idea was very much sort of go after, make it more accessible for small businesses to have a sponsor license, and just kind of fine tuning that idea, because obviously we also can't just say any small business. There's sort of more than 5 million businesses just in the
mhm,
UK. Fine tuned it to those who really needed this service. You know, they needed it really fast, and that tends to be, VC backed or very sort of high growth startups that are just saying, okay, we've just fundraised, whatever millions, and the first thing we're going to do with that funding is to build a team
mhm.
around ourselves. And that's when you need, and you're competing in a ruthless environment for that talent, so you can't really afford to say, oh, I spoke to the law firm, they told us it could take 8 weeks. I mean, that's just not the kind of turnaround time that these guys are really working with. So
Yeah.
that's, we really found like a fit with that segment, that also then actually uh, splurged onto more sort of scale up. So similarly, they started as a startup, so they have that mentality. They sort of move really fast, and they want to maybe expand to the UK. So they're looking for someone to really sort of understand the startup environment, have that experience, and then kind of adapt to it. I mean,
Yeah.
in terms of, yeah, so as I say, because it's not a product, it is a service. Obviously, benefiting from so much automation that goes into how I process the work.
Mhm,
Um, but they can't, it's just that case of like, they don't really want to rule out the lawyer either. So it's
mhm.
just sort of making sure that that person that is in the loop, that is going to spend whatever, 10% of the process in being involved, that you really get on, and that person really understands, what your business needs.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's sort of like, it's a lot of building that trust, and I think that it's gelled the best with the startup tech company scene.
Can you talk a little bit about the AI? I mean, kind of where, because in the US, for example, we have companies that just focus on immigration AI, and they are SaaS companies, so they're not really
Right.
service companies per se, but they're in the tech stack of a law firm. There are
Mm,
some companies that really focus on drafting. We have some visa applications that are very, very writing heavy, and so
mm,
having sophisticated, tailor-made and trained AI models, which are
yeah.
proprietary, I guess, and then they have, they draft these things in a format that's predefined, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's one, that research. So, like, where does Imminova, I guess, like, I'm just thinking, okay, I'm listening to this podcast and thinking, all right, that all sounds lovely and great. If
Mm,
I'm interested, I want to know, where is the AI? Where is their efficiency versus where is the human,
yeah.
touch? Is it in the drafting? Is it in the customer service and the response, et cetera?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, immigration, so corporate immigration is definitely just, I would say, just a sequence of admin. It's, no specific task is actually that complicated or difficult, or, so you could just definitely, definitely kind of just, get through it. And that's the sort of prime example of some people do and do it themselves. It's just more painful, and but I guess what that means is there's sort of infinite moments where you could really mess it up. And it just might just come down to something, very silly, like forgetting to tick something on a form and so on.
Mm-hmm.
So, and you see that a lot with we tend to think, okay, if there's a human doing it, I trust it more. They will whatever tick that box. But actually, I think a lot of sort of evidence is now showing that humans are as likely to make those mistakes, especially at volume. If you're sort of processing however many applications per day and you're just sort of seeing the same form all the time, you're very likely to actually miss out on certain things. And immigration is definitely one thing where you cannot afford any mistakes. So that's why it sort of makes it so such a kind of where emotions run very high. So I think with that, the automation side is definitely everything that I used to do in the law firm very systematically. Completing a form, or just gathering documents. Or right now, for example, LLMs are definitely in a really good place where it could really sort of parse documents, or just, we, for example, created like a document validation. So it takes out, I don't know, hours out of my time to just verify that it's in the right format, that it's still valid, or when the next renewal is coming, and so on. So there's definitely a lot of touch points. I think it's important to have that human in the loop just to kind of make sure that it's done everything correctly, which is funny. I guess we'll sort of maybe touch on that. Sort of recently, I was talking to an attorney in the US who was saying, my job has, shifted from being a lawyer and doing everything myself to just reviewing whatever AI is doing. So I think there's sort of definitely like that element to it too. But really, ultimately, the outcome is very, very strong. And I think that it's definitely stuff now that, it's just part of a system that LLMs are just extremely good at handling. And so what we do is we build these sort of small automation points where, it might not, to the client who's doing this for the first time, and maybe they won't do it again, it doesn't really matter, right? So you only know what you know. But it is just very seamless. I remember, for example, endless strings of emails going back and forth between the lawyer and the client, asking for further documents. Oh, actually, we forgot this, and oh, it didn't attach. Or, even worse, kind of hating the fact that documents, very sensitive documents, are attached to emails in the first place, and that sort of thing. So that's where we've kind of just plugged it all together, so that when everything from as soon as you come in, you're onboarded, to everything to actually being submitted. It just kind of all is done for the client without having to do anything. And I think it just really takes away that really stressful element of the work. I think you go to lawyers, and often what happens is they put it back on you, just like, well, you have to do this and you have to gather. And I think that's fair enough. Ultimately, that's also not really their role. But I think it's just, you're just there, and it's already an expensive process. And I think you're doing a lot of the heavy lifting. So it's just about sort of plugging in those gaps, and just making sure that everything ties in nicely.
When we launched Laborless, part of the crux for me was this specific, I mean, I won't get into all the details with this H-1B visa compliance stuff, but this specific process that we help automate was sort of like started with the lawyer, but then put back onto the shoulders of the client, the corporate client, because logistically it was something that sort of had to be done physically, sort of paperwork hanging in the office, etc. There was a way to do it virtually, like the law allowed for it, but there was no tool for it. And so I, as a lawyer, when the client initiated a case with me, I said, okay, great, we'll handle these aspects, but this piece, this compliance piece, here's an email with instructions and documents, and you, who are paying me thousands of dollars, you go back and do your homework, and you get it done. And again, to your point, fair, right? It's, if that's what the law requires, that's what the law requires. But as a client, if there's an option for the lawyer to do that, I would say, well, I want you to do it. I'm paying you for the whole immigration process. So I'm with you on that. 100% of when there is an ability to take something off the plate of your client and do it as a service provider. I mean, most of the time clients are more than happy to pay for that because they
Oh
just want
yeah.
to make sure it gets done correctly and that they don't have to learn some new thing. And if they're hiring once or twice, if they're a high growth firm, they're hiring a senior engineer for £500,000 or whatever. They need to make sure that that happens more than they need to save the extra $1,000 or pounds on a legal service. So
Yeah,
yeah, I think it's a great
exactly.
outlook. It's like a customer first outlook, which in my view is a recipe for success almost always. Um,
Yeah.
so today Imminova is the service that it's basically you're basically like an AI and tech enabled law firm, effectively, right? Immigration law firm
Yes.
that people can leverage for their work visas. Is there like a portal that people can log into that where they dump their documents, they interact with you? I mean, is it sort of like they log in through the site?
Yeah, so I mean, it's really interesting. We built out a full platform, so it's definitely there if clients want to use it. I think recently I've just also realized that, once again, I actually want to interact a lot with my clients. I want to understand like what, at some point, is it actually really annoying for them to like log in and just upload those documents? I want to kind of almost be a fly on the wall to hear the rants about, because I have actually seen friends and so close ones using this type of portal approach for the US. And I've definitely heard them say, oh my God, I have to now log in here and I've just got to upload all my documents and so on. And that's what made me sort of start thinking, okay, do actually, people are actually just so much happier just sending you like a really messy folder,
Right.
and just like you figure it out, you do
Right.
what you need to do. And so we've tried that recently, and it's just I think someone just called it magic, and it's just I think I just love hearing that because I think so I mean it is so simple. I just think in my head I thought maybe people care about the UX and how they interact with the platform and so on, and some might still do, which is great. So
Yeah.
it's there for use, and everything is kind of working smoothly end to end. But actually, I think you just kind of realize, right, there's some people that just don't really care about sort of like a nicer interface that still makes them do a lot of the work. So
Right.
so I think it just depends on the clients and where you can be that value add and what matters to them.
Yeah.
So but in terms of like how it works, I always have a first call with clients, and I think it's funny because you know I have this discussion with engineers, and they definitely have a different view on it, whereby I guess it makes sense, right? Because they want to build stuff. But it's not because it's sort of AI native, or that it's tech enabled, or that you have automation, that you should take out the kind of human touch or human element. I think to your earlier point, I think it actually probably is, especially immigration is all about the people. So you definitely still need to be there. So we have an initial call, initial assessment, and then thereafter, sort of depending on how they'd like to go forward, just sort of, somewhere they could upload documents, or, just like a magic link where they can just sort of pop in all their documents, and then everything gets kind of gets underway. And, the quickest turnaround we've had is sort of within 48 hours of just kind of receiving everything to actually like submission.
Yeah.
And just got the approval the other day. So I mean, it's just
Nice.
and it's just sort of wonderful to kind of see these loops getting quicker and quicker. And I think speed is definitely just something really important to kind of crack with immigration without losing the quality, right? Because no one cares if you get a refusal, but you've done it in the day. So it's just kind of, so you got to get that balance right.
What do you think of the future for a business like this? I mean, I run a SaaS company, and
Mm,
we sort of I grew up around SaaS in a way,
mm,
and there was always the idea that you build this and you can scale it almost infinitely, and
right.
et cetera. With a service company, scaling will require, if it's a human-based service or a company like yours, where there is a person at the core and there's software that helps you interact with the client, that
Mm,
supports you, et cetera, but there is still you.
yeah.
If you want to grow, you have to multiply you, right? And
Yeah.
hire more people or whatever. So, not to say that you have to necessarily think about hyperscaling, but what's your thought then about growing a company like Imminova? Is it
Yeah.
finding additional experienced attorneys who are, interested in tech like yourself, or is it maybe starting to lean further into tech and sort of
Mm,
scale yourself, but that cuts down the human to human time? Like, what are your thoughts on
mm.
that?
Yeah, so it's so topical because I've just been, I've been spending a lot of brain power on this recently, and I think it's when I first started off, I think I was thinking about product market fit, and people were telling me, "Oh, why do you concern yourself with that? You don't even have a product yet." And I think looking back, I'm just realizing, maybe I am the product here. Maybe to your point is about sort of and scaling. I think you know again, as you said, we think about scaling in terms of a product that you sell, that you can multiply, that you can sort of add features to, and so on. But actually, I just kind of realized, well, actually, for immigration, for the type of service that I want to do, that probably doesn't, necessarily make sense. So how do I multiply myself? Very
Mm.
recently, a law firm in the UK actually got their SRA license, which is essentially like the regulator to be an official, operate as a law firm. The difference is all of their attorneys were AI. So, and it's just sort of full AI law firm. And I think that sort of really points to something quite interesting here in terms of where this is going. I think, yes, definitely, you know, I still would like to kind of have that human touch as much as possible. I think it's really important to be super close to your clients and understand what is it that what is the pain, and how we can kind of get in front of it. But I think in terms of the work that is being done, actually, you can probably, and things are getting, AI is getting really good by the second. I mean, there's definitely a road here to scaling that I think that up until now hasn't really been on the cards. And I think that, if you said a couple of years ago there's going to be a law firm with a bunch of AI paralegals in it, people would have thought you'd sort of lost your mind. So I think it's just sort of, I think there's definitely, that's probably the road to scale a business like this. Up until now, I mean, the road was more sort of traditional. You would sort of, get attorneys in and they would help train the product and so on. But I think that there's definitely that next gear shift, which will be very interesting.
It's interesting. So I look, because I remember seeing this on the news. You reminded me. So this is
Mm,
Garfield AI.
yeah.
I think you're talking about, right?
Mm.
Not to plug them necessarily, but it's very, very limited. Like so this is like a claims, you could claim money back and from, I guess, I don't know, unpaid invoices or something
Exactly.
from,
Yeah.
which is interesting. I mean, it's smart because it's a very sort of limited use case. There's no, if you get it wrong, there's no like, major, negative outcome. You either get a little bit less money than you thought you would, or maybe you can refile the claim. Immigration is not like that. If you get it wrong and the government says, sorry, we've, denied your visa, or worse, like you're banned from ever entering the country, etc., it is very hard to, reverse that or appeal it or whatnot. And so, I think this is neat and cool,
Mm.
but it's actually, no offense to Garfield, it's really amazing for them, but it's not as impressive. It's like saying it's an AI only law firm. It sounds almost I don't know, dystopian rather.
Yeah.
But really, this is an agent that does a very limited sort of task that maybe you previously would have paid a lawyer to do, but now
Mm.
you don't. And maybe the lawyer would have recovered £10,000. I mean, it says here claims up to £10,000. Maybe the lawyer
Mm.
would have recovered £10,000 for you, but it would have taken them a month, and then it would have cost you £3,500. Here,
Right.
maybe this AI can recover, £8,500, and it'll cost you 100. So you maybe got
Mm.
a little bit back, quote unquote, but you actually made, you didn't spend nearly as much. So I think it's interesting to think about that. But I do feel, and I suspect that most of my immigration colleagues would agree that in our industry, at least for the time being, but honestly, probably into the future indefinitely,
Mm.
or for a very, very long period of time until we're like interplanetary people,
Mm.
where immigration is no longer from country to country. It's like, well, what solar system do you want to go to? Well,
Yeah.
I don't know. There's a shortage of satellite workers in solar system X. And
Mm.
so I got to go get a visa for that. Until we're there, I just don't think that AI will meaningfully take away the entire work of an immigration lawyer across the board? Some basic visas that are inconsequential, basically. Sure. Right. But
Yeah.
yeah.
So I actually, I mean, I 100% agree with that. But I think you're right. Like the human in the loop, I don't think is going anywhere. But I guess the reality is that, where previously, in order to scale, you needed to get more people in. I think right now there's definitely a way of just like,
Yeah.
extending, that one person, or maybe just even getting to a level where it's just kind of, kind of close to just, almost kind of infinite ways of just, optimizing your time and so on. So I think it'll just come down to the head count, that it just doesn't need
Exactly.
to be that big anymore. And I think, I'm not sure how Garfield do it. I think, I'm pretty sure they still have humans in the loop. I guess the point is like the paralegals or like junior staff that you would have otherwise have to recruit, train up. There's like a big sort of ramp up timing as well. I think if that just sort of goes out, and if right now I'm involved in sort of 15 to 20% of the process, if that goes down systematically, then yeah, you can basically just improve your productivity and scale this in just like a different way.
So interesting. It's so fascinating that we live in this world today, and it's sort
Yeah.
of, I mean, I don't know if we're in an AI bubble, but AI stocks continue to balloon, and the
Right.
investment in everything from infrastructure to models to everything continues to rise. So I guess if governments around the world and massive countries continue to invest in it, it will continue to trickle down into our space. It's really, I want to end on a question that is a little bit unrelated to specifically AI, but I like to ask it, you as an entrepreneur. So oftentimes people ask sort of, what advice maybe would you give to yourself, your younger self, or to a, first-time entrepreneur? I like to ask sort of the flip side of that question, which is, what advice are you listening to right now? Like, what's the advice that is affecting you today with whatever you're dealing with, at Imminova?
Interesting. Yeah. Oh, that's a good question. What advice? I mean, I think the thing is with startups, it's great because everyone wants to give you advice, and I think it's so there's definitely like a lot of different angles. The one I think that I get quite a lot is just I guess with a startup, you just can't overthink every element of it. And I think that I kind of take that on quite a lot as a kind of lawyer. I'm very, very sort of, very detailed, very specific and so on. And I think that actually there is probably quite a lot of room for, sort of just, the one more recently was just sort of, ask for forgiveness, not permission. And I think that, with a pinch of salt, but definitely I think that's true, right? It's like, I think it's just, if you constantly sort of think about, oh, could I do that and could I not? I think, and that's probably what sort of held me back from, getting started for so long. And you just have to, get to a stage where you're comfortable with like, okay, this just going to happen and we're just going to see. And also just kind of coming at it from like a very naive way, just saying like, I really don't know anything about it. I'm just going to ask all the stupid questions here, because actually I think there's just much more potential to uncover something. When I've been in sort of positions before, I thought I would sort of ask really, very, very basic questions that, people don't necessarily have a good answer for. And I think that's just something, again, just kind of bringing it back to the table, just ask really sort of basic questions. And if you got an answer for it, great. If it takes you more than sort of a couple sentences to get that together, like it's probably time to think about why we're doing certain things in this way still. So yeah, those are sort of two advice I recently got, and it just sort of stays with me.
I love that. So where can people find you? Where's the best place for them to connect with you and then also the company?
Amazing. So On LinkedIn, I try to be sort of as vocal as possible, but I don't have a sort of very easy to find name. But but if you get it right, so Nisan Yesildaglar is sort of my handle on LinkedIn. They can email at hello@imminova.com, or just reach out to me directly, nisan@imminova.com. Or also on our website, just sort of drop a note there. It's imminova.com. So yeah.
Awesome. Well, Nisan, thank you so much. This was amazing, great conversation, and it's very interesting again to hear how things are developing, in the UK and in this case, but truly around the world. We'll see what happens with AI in general. It's everyone talks about it every single day, no matter if you're in the laundromat or the bar or the legal bar or the drinking kind of bar. Everyone's talking about it. So good luck to you, and thank you for being on the show and for sharing your story. And I definitely, for folks who are interested, I invite them to reach out to you and check out your website. So thank you again for being on the show.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. That was great.
Thanks. All right, everybody. Thank you so much. By the way, we had a couple comments that I didn't get to. Seth Finberg, who said, I usually watch these on LinkedIn, but it showed up on YouTube today, which is wonderful. Thank you, Seth. We did have a comment here, and Nisan, you will probably want to respond to this later in written form. I don't know who this is. Can't see their name here, but it asked, does Imminova facilitate e-filing to government sites? So I didn't get a chance to get to it. I missed it. The conversation was so compelling. I forgot to check the comments, but definitely hope that I'm sure Nisan will reply to you there. Before we sign off, I just want to give a quick thank you and shout out to DocketWise, the main sponsor of this episode, 8 a.m. DocketWise. So just as a reminder for any immigration lawyers or paralegals or anybody in a corporate team, in-house immigration, mobility, DocketWise is an end-to-end immigration case management platform that provides immigration forums, questionnaires, integrations, great customer service for all of your employment-based, family-based, humanitarian immigration needs, across the board. DocketWise started as a company called BorderWise, which was B2C, and then they pivoted to, helping lawyers. So first they sold to individuals, then they eventually sold to lawyers as DocketWise. A couple of years back, DocketWise was acquired by a couple of companies, and they've rebranded as 8 a.m. So they have all sorts of products, legal tech products, billing for lawyers, etc. So do check them out. The website is the number 8am.com/DocketWise. And if you talk to them, or there's a link in the show notes. And if you do talk to them, let them know that you heard about them from the GMI Rocket show. So with that, thank you everybody again for being here, for tuning in, for all the comments, even though I got to them a little bit late, and for always supporting the show. And see you on the next episode. In the meantime, have a great weekend. Stay safe and peace out.